Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a major story developing in Northern Europe, one that's shifting the balance of power in the Baltic region in a way that many experts say could reshape the strategic landscape for years to come. Denmark, a country often seen as a quiet but steady NATO member, has just taken an action that is being described as game-changing, bold, and deeply significant. This isn't just another diplomatic move or routine military update. This is something that touches the entire balance of influence between NATO and Russia in the Baltic Sea. And the more you look into it, the clearer it becomes that Denmark's decision might be one of the most decisive steps Europe has seen since the earlier rounds of NATO expansion. For many, this moment marks the beginning of a completely new phase in Baltic security. At first glance, Denmark may not seem like the most obvious country to dramatically alter the power dynamics of an entire region. It's small in population, modest in land size, and not typically associated with the kind of large, headline-grabbing military actions that define global power struggles. But Denmark's location tells a much deeper story. Sitting at the entrance to the Baltic Sea, controlling access through the waters between the North Sea and the Baltic, Denmark holds a geographic position that is far more important than it often gets credit for. If Europe were a house, Denmark would be the gatekeeper to one of its most sensitive corridors. The straits around Denmark are the doorway through which anyone entering or leaving the Baltic must pass, and that includes Russia's naval forces. This has always given Denmark quiet but undeniable leverage. Now, with its latest move, Denmark has chosen to fully use that leverage for the first time in decades. The action Denmark has taken revolves around strengthening, expanding, and modernizing its military posture in the Baltic Sea in a way that essentially closes key vulnerabilities and gives NATO a much tighter grip on the region. This shift didn't happen spontaneously. It's the result of months of analysis, years of growing tension, and decades of understanding how fragile Baltic security truly is. For years, Russia has relied on the assumption that the Baltic Sea was a contested space, an area where NATO had influence but not overwhelming control. Denmark's new action, however, changes that calculation. By heavily boosting its surveillance systems, air defenses, naval patrols, and strategic readiness, Denmark has effectively turned the Baltic into what some analysts are calling a fortified NATO zone of dominance. And Denmark's decision to publicly announce it, rather than quietly upgrade its capabilities, signals that it wants this message to be heard loud and clear in Moscow. The announcement started with increased naval deployments, but it didn't stop there. Denmark made it clear that it is also integrating more closely with Finland, Sweden, and Norway, forming a kind of northern shield that covers the entire upper arc of the Baltic region. This isn't symbolic cooperation. It's a real operational and highly coordinated alignment that makes it much harder for Russia to maneuver, pressure, or intimidate neighboring countries. Denmark's action is forcing Russia to rethink its maritime strategies, especially since Finland and Sweden are now part of NATO's architecture. Denmark's move links all these countries in a way that creates something close to a security wall along the Baltic Rim. One of the biggest changes Denmark announced involves new radar networks, early warning systems, and upgraded infrastructure that allows NATO forces to monitor Russian naval movement with far greater precision than before. Every submarine, every ship, every aircraft entering the region will now be more visible, tracked, and recorded. This dramatically reduces the space Russia once had to operate covertly or unpredictably. In addition, Denmark's decision includes new funding for advanced anti-ship weapons, capable of targeting vessels long before they reach Danish waters. For NATO, it's like installing a lock on a door that used to be partially open. For Russia, it's like realizing that one of its only maritime escape routes is no longer freely accessible. In the context of geopolitics, symbolic actions matter just as much as material ones. Denmark knows this. By adopting this stronger Baltic posture, Denmark is sending a message that it refuses to be the weak link or passive bystander. Instead, it wants to be seen as a vanguard state in the defense of Northern Europe. This decision has boosted Denmark's credibility within NATO, especially among countries like Poland and the Baltic states, who have long urged the alliance to take the Russian threat more seriously. Denmark's initiative shows that even smaller NATO members can play oversized roles when geography and timing align. What really elevates Denmark's move, though, is the timing. Europe is in a period of heightened anxiety. The war in Ukraine has stretched into its third year. Russia continues to push aggressive narratives, and hybrid threats like cyber attacks and undersea sabotage have become more common. Denmark's action directly responds to these threats by making its critical infrastructure, including pipelines and undersea cables, far better protected. The Nord Stream pipeline explosions in 2022 exposed exactly how vulnerable the Baltic region was, and Denmark appears determined not to be caught off guard again. By bolstering surveillance and naval readiness, Denmark is ensuring that any suspicious activity, whether a submarine lurking near a cable or a drone flying near infrastructure, will be detected immediately. Another major element of the decision is Denmark's increased cooperation with NATO air forces. The country will now play a more central role in policing Baltic airspace. This includes more frequent flights by F-16s and eventually F-35s, coordinated with Norway and the Baltic states. The implications of this are enormous. The skies above the Baltic Sea have always been contested, with Russian jets frequently flying close to NATO aircraft. Now, Denmark's action ensures there is a constant, well-coordinated, and technologically superior presence in the air. This alone reduces the chances of Russian aircraft conducting unsafe or provocative maneuvers, because they will now be closely monitored and confronted earlier. Inside Denmark, the move has broad political support. Most Danish parties agree that the security environment has changed, and that the country must rise to meet the challenge. What's interesting is that Danish leaders emphasize that this is not an act of aggression, but an act of protection. Protection for Denmark, protection for NATO, and protection for the entire Baltic region. It's a defensive shift, but one that carries enormous strategic impact. The Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, have welcomed the decision enthusiastically. For them, Denmark's move represents reassurance that they won't be left on their own in the event of increased Russian pressure. Russia, unsurprisingly, has reacted with anger. Officials in Moscow accused Denmark of escalating tensions and militarizing the Baltic Sea, but these statements are predictable. Russia uses the same language whenever NATO strengthens its defenses. What matters more are the subtle shifts happening behind the scenes. Russian naval forces now know they must operate more cautiously near Danish waters. Russian submarines must avoid certain areas or risk early detection. Russian aircraft must think twice before flying provocative routes. In essence, Denmark's action compresses Russia's maneuvering room and introduces new risks for any bold moves in the Baltic. But the story doesn't stop with military posture. Denmark's decision also connects to a broader European trend of building tighter regional alliances. For years, Europe operated under the assumption that peace with Russia was stable and predictable. Now, that assumption has been shattered. Countries across Europe, from the Nordics to Central Europe, are reinforcing their defenses, increasing their military budgets, and integrating their strategies. Denmark's move is part of this larger shift, but it stands out because it transforms the Baltic Sea from a shared, contested space into a heavily monitored NATO-controlled zone. This is the part of the Baltic power shift that will probably be remembered years from now. One of the most fascinating aspects of Denmark's decision is how much it relies on technology. The modern battlefield isn't just about ships, planes, or soldiers. It's about information. Denmark understands that whoever sees first, reacts first, and controls the flow of data has the advantage. By investing heavily in intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance systems, Denmark is stepping into a future-focused form of defense. These systems allow NATO forces to detect threats early, coordinate responses instantly, and operate with real-time intelligence. It also sends a clear message to Russia that sneaking through the Baltic undetected is no longer possible. Another important piece of the puzzle is Denmark's relationship with Germany. The two countries share not just borders but strategic interests within the Baltic Sea. Germany's navy works closely with Denmark, and Denmark's latest move strengthens this cooperation. Together, they form one of the most effective naval partnerships in Northern Europe. Increased Danish activity in the Baltic means German forces can rely on stronger regional support. It's a multiplier effect. Every step Denmark takes improves the coordination, response time, and capability of the whole northern flank. Many defense analysts are calling Denmark's decision bold because it closes a gap in NATO's defensive alignment. Before Finland and Sweden joined the alliance, the Baltic region was always seen as partially exposed. Now, with Denmark's strengthened posture, that gap is effectively sealed. The Baltic is turning into what some have described as a NATO lake, where Allied forces can move freely, coordinate seamlessly, and present a united front. Denmark's action completes this circle and ensures there are no weak points at the entrance to the sea. One key reason Denmark's move is so impactful is because it disrupts one of Russia's long-term strategies. Russia has always relied on creating uncertainty. Whether through military pressure, hybrid operations, or ambiguous maneuvers, Russia thrives when NATO is divided or caught off guard. Denmark is removing that uncertainty by making the Baltic more predictable and stable from a NATO perspective. That means fewer opportunities for Russia to exploit hesitations or gaps. Denmark's clear, decisive action cuts through the ambiguity and gives NATO a stronger foundation for future planning. Another major part of this power shift involves maritime security. Denmark is increasing patrols around critical undersea infrastructure, including energy pipelines, data cables, and shipping routes. These are the arteries of modern Europe. If compromised, the damage would be immense. Because of this, Denmark's increased vigilance doesn't just protect itself. It protects the entire European Union's economic backbone. With new patrols, new sonar systems, and improved coordination with other NATO navies, Denmark is ensuring that any interference or sabotage attempt will be detected early. This is one of the most important but least discussed aspects of Denmark's decision. The move also has economic consequences. The Baltic Sea is a major trade route for Northern Europe. By enhancing security and monitoring, Denmark is effectively stabilizing these waterways. More secure trade routes mean more reliable shipping, fewer risks for cargo carriers, and increased confidence for industries relying on maritime transport. This matters not just for Europe, but also for global markets. Denmark's action creates a climate where businesses can operate with new levels of confidence in Baltic shipping. Meanwhile, the Nordic countries are celebrating the decision because it makes joint defense planning easier and more effective. Sweden and Finland, as new NATO members, have been integrating rapidly into alliance structures. Denmark's decision supports this integration and strengthens the northern defense architecture. Norway, which already works closely with Denmark, benefits too, particularly in terms of coordinating air and naval operations across the region. Put simply, Denmark's action amplifies the power of every NATO member in Northern Europe. But perhaps the most profound impact of Denmark's move lies in how it changes perceptions. Denmark is no longer seen as a passive actor or a secondary NATO member. It has positioned itself as a core player in shaping Northern Europe's security future. This reshaping of perception matters enormously in geopolitics. Countries that project strength and clarity often gain influence far beyond their size. Denmark is now one of those countries. Its leadership in this moment sets a new standard for how smaller nations can assert strategic power. As Europe continues to navigate an uncertain geopolitical landscape, Denmark's decision may become a model for other nations. It demonstrates that decisive action, combined with strategic investment and regional cooperation, can shift the balance of power even without massive armies or huge military budgets. It shows that geography, when used wisely, becomes a force multiplier. And it reinforces the idea that the Baltic Sea is no longer a vulnerable zone, but a protected, closely monitored environment backed by some of the world's most advanced military systems. For Russia, the Baltic Sea is now becoming a far more challenging environment. Every move is watched more closely. Every route is more restricted. Every operation carries more risk. This doesn't mean Russia loses all influence in the region, but it does mean that influence is sharply reduced. And it means Russia must rethink how it approaches the Baltic, especially now that its naval access is monitored by highly sophisticated NATO systems, backed by Denmark's new strategic posture. In the long run, Denmark's action may help prevent escalation by creating clear boundaries. Uncertainty often fuels conflict. When countries don't know where the lines are, miscalculations happen. By establishing a firm, transparent, and well-communicated security framework, Denmark helps reduce these risks. Russia may not like the new reality, but it understands it, and understanding creates stability even in tense environments. As Europe looks ahead, the Baltic region will continue to be a hotspot for strategic competition. But Denmark's move ensures that this competition occurs within a framework that favors NATO stability and European security. The ripple effects will be felt for decades, shaping decisions by governments, militaries, and industries across the continent. Denmark may not have set out to redefine the Baltic Sea entirely, but that's exactly what has happened. Its decisive action marks a turning point in Northern European security. It represents a confident step into a new era where NATO's northern flank is stronger, more integrated, and more prepared than ever before. The Baltic power shift is here, and Denmark is at the center of it.